The morning air in the valley was crisp, smelling of damp cedar and the promise of a quiet Saturday. I sat on my porch, cradling a mug of coffee, looking out over the 50 acres that had been in the Miller family for 3 generations. My property was an island of wild, unmanicured beauty, bordered on 3 sides by the Stonegate Crest luxury development, a sprawl of identical beige mansions and aggressive lawn care. I wasn't part of Stonegate. When the developers bought the surrounding orchards 10 years ago, my father refused to sell. A man needs dirt that hasn't been dictated by a committee, he'd say. So while Stonegate had a homeowners association (HOA) with a handbook the size of a phone booth, I had a gravel driveway, a rusted tractor, and total freedom. The peace was shattered by the rhythmic thump-thump of heels on my gravel. I didn't need to look up to know it was Brenda, the president of the Stonegate Crest HOA. Arthur, she barked, stopping at the base of my porch steps. She was wearing a crisp white linen suit that cost more than my truck. We have a situation. Morning, Brenda, I said, not moving. If it's about the height of my pasture grass again, I've got the surveyor's map right here, still not in your jurisdiction. Brenda gave a tight, practiced smile. It's about the Centennial Gala. Our clubhouse flooded last night, a pipe burst in the catering kitchen. It's a disaster. We have 300 guests arriving this afternoon, including the mayor and the senator. That's a shame, I said sincerely. Hope the insurance covers it. Arthur, don't be obtuse. Your lower meadow, the one that connects to our south gate, is the only flat space large enough to host the marquee. I've already contacted the rental company. They'll be arriving at noon to set up the tents. I set my coffee down. Brenda, you're not listening. That's my land. I'm not hosting a gala. I have a transmission to pull out of my Jeep this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to the silence. Brenda's face turned a shade of mottled purple. I don't think you understand. This is a community event. I have already sent out the digital itinerary. I have chartered 10 executive shuttle buses to ferry the VIPs from the satellite parking lot because we don't want their luxury cars on the construction dirt. They are arriving at 4:00 p.m. You sent invitations for a party on my land without asking? I stood up. I'm not a tall man, but I have the shoulders of someone who spent 40 years fixing fences. The answer is no. Get off my porch. You're being selfish, Arthur. It's just one evening, she screamed as she retreated toward her golf cart. The buses are already paid for, the caterers are coming. I'm the president of this association and I will not let you ruin my reputation. Your reputation isn't my mortgage, Brenda, I called back. By 2:00 p.m., the situation escalated. I was under my Jeep when I heard the heavy rumble of a diesel engine. I slid out on my creeper to see a massive flatbed truck loaded with white canvas tents trying to turn into my driveway. I walked down to the gate, a heavy, industrial-grade steel sliding gate I'd installed years ago to keep poachers and stray cattle out. Private property, I shouted to the driver, turn it around. 10 minutes later, Brenda arrived in her golf cart flanked by 2 other board members. They looked like a suburban paramilitary unit in their matching polo shirts. Open this gate immediately, Brenda screamed over the idling truck. You are obstructing a sanctioned event. Sanctioned by who? I asked, leaning against the steel post. You have no easement here, you have no contract, you are trespassing. I'll sue you, she shrieked. I'll tie you up in court until you're penniless. Brenda, I said calmly, I've lived here 60 years. I know every lawyer in this county and 3 of them are coming over tonight for a poker game. Go home. She looked at me with a terrifying, wild-eyed grin. Fine, have it your way, we'll just use the south entrance. The south entrance was an old logging trail that technically crossed a tiny sliver of Stonegate common ground before entering my property. It was overgrown and blocked by an old chain-link gate I rarely used. She thought she'd found a loophole. I watched them drive off. I knew what she was planning. She thought she could force my hand by simply showing up with the crowd. She assumed that once the important people were there, I'd be too embarrassed or intimidated to turn them away. She didn't know me very well. At 3:45 p.m., I drove my tractor down to the south gate. It was a heavy thing, reinforced with rusted barbed wire. Beyond it lay the narrow, winding dirt track that led back to the main road. I saw the first bus. It was a gleaming, black executive coach, then another, and another. They were lined up like a funeral procession for common sense. I stepped out of my tractor and checked the heavy master lock on the gate. I doubled it with a thick grade 8 transport chain. The first bus pulled up to the gate. The driver honked. I stood there, arms crossed. Brenda jumped out of a lead SUV looking triumphant. She ran to the gate, her heels sinking into the soft mud of the logging trail. "Arthur, open this gate. The senator is in the third bus." "The senator is trespassing on private property," I shouted back. "Turn the buses around, Brenda. The road is too narrow for them to pass each other, so you're going to have to back them all the way out to the highway." "You wouldn't dare," she hissed, her voice trembling. "There are elderly people on these buses. It's 85 degrees. "Then I suggest you turn the AC on and start revering," I said, "because this gate stays shut." I didn't stay to argue. I walked back to my house, went inside and turned on the radio. But I didn't just sit there. I knew Brenda. She was the type to try and cut the chain. I grabbed my lawn chair, a cooler of iced tea, and my dog Buster. I walked back down to the gate and sat on the inside of my property. The scene was chaos. The buses were trapped. The logging trail was a one-way in, one-way out deal, hemmed in by deep ditches and thick woods. The lead bus couldn't turn around, and the 9 buses behind it were bumper to bumper. Brenda was screaming at the lead driver. The driver was shaking his head, pointing at the narrow shoulders of the road. Then the windows started coming down. Well-dressed men and women leaned out, looking confused. They were wearing tuxedos and evening gowns, staring at my rusted tractor and the "No Trespassing" sign that I had highlighted with a fresh coat of red paint. "Excuse me," a woman in a shimmering gold dress called out to me through the gate. "Is this the Centennial Gala?" "No, ma'am," I said, tipping my hat. "This is the Miller Farm. We grow hay and mind our own business. The gala you're looking for was canceled due to a flood." "But it seems your coordinator forgot to mention that." The woman looked at Brenda, who was currently having what looked like a physical breakdown, stomping her feet in the dirt. "Brenda," the woman shouted, "you told us this was a private estate garden party. Why are we stuck in a swamp?" "It is a private estate," Brenda yelled back, her voice cracking. "This man is just being a domestic terrorist." I laughed. "I'm a man sitting in my own yard, Brenda. You're the one who brought a parade to a dead end." The senator, a man I recognized from local TV, actually stepped off the third bus. He adjusted his suit jacket and walked up to the gate. He looked at Brenda, then at the chain, then at me. "Son," the senator said, "is there a problem here?" "No problem for me, Senator," I said. "I've got plenty of tea and a comfortable chair. The problem is for the person who directed 10 multi-ton vehicles onto a private, unpaved logging road without a permit or permission. If those buses sink into the soft shoulder, they're going to need a heavy-duty crane to get them out, and that costs about $5,000 an hour." The senator looked at the ground. The tires of the lead bus were already starting to settle into the damp earth. He turned to Brenda. "Brenda, you told the committee you had a signed venue agreement." Brenda turned white. I thought he'd be reasonable for the good of the community." "The community," the senator said coldly, "does not include breaking the law. Get us out of here." But they couldn't. That was the beauty of the geography. The trail was too narrow to turn. The buses had to back up one by one in a synchronized retreat that required a spotter for every vehicle. It was a 3-mile stretch of winding dirt. It took 4 hours. I sat there the whole time. I watched the sun begin to set, casting long, golden shadows over my unmanicured fields. Occasionally, a guest would ask to use my bathroom, and I'd politely point them toward the bushes on the other side of the fence. "Not my guests, not my plumbing," I'd say. Brenda stayed until the very last bus began its agonizingly slow reverse crawl. She was covered in dust, her white suit was stained with mud, and her hair, which usually looked like a plastic helmet, was frazzled and wild. She walked up to the gate one last time. I stood up and met her there. "You've ruined me," she whispered, her eyes full of genuine hate. "The board will vote me out by Monday. The social humiliation. I'll never be able to show my face at the club again." "Brenda," I said softly, "all you had to do was ask. If you'd come to me a month ago, man to man or neighbor to neighbor, and offered to pay a fair rental fee and help me fix that leaning barn, I probably would have said yes. But you didn't ask, you commanded. You thought your HOA title gave you power over my dirt." I jangled the keys to the master lock. In Stonegate you might be queen, but out here I'm the king of the mud, and the king says it's time for you to go home. She didn't say another word. She got into her SUV and backed out, following the red taillights of the last bus into the dark. I stayed out there for a while after they left. The silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. The crickets started up and the owls began their nightly patrol. The air no longer smelled of diesel fumes, it smelled of cooling earth and wild grass. I walked back to the house, Buster trotting at my heels. The next morning, I heard that Brenda had resigned. I also heard that the great bus blunder was the talk of the county. People were calling it the bust at Brenda's gate. A week later, a small package arrived at my door. It was a bottle of high-end bourbon and a note. "Thanks for the show, best night I've had in politics in years, the senator." I poured a glass, sat on my porch, and looked out at my beautiful, messy, HOA-free land. The gate was locked, the grass was long, and for the first time in years the neighbors finally understood where the line was drawn.